So, welcome to our Sunday morning Dharma session. And this morning I just want to tell a small story. This story is supposed to be a true story, but as almost nothing is known about the person involved, except for the salient points, I will embellish it to make it relevant not only to the 21st century, but to our Dharma practice. Telling stories is an ancient and traditional way of sharing Dharma, and that's the whole point of any of this, is to share Dharma. These are not lessons. There is not something that I think you are lacking that you need to become, but simply by hearing these words, perhaps it inspires something to you. And if I tell a story to 20 people, then there are 20 different stories being heard, and each one of us hears our own story. So parts of the story will resonate in your heart, and other parts will perhaps bypass you completely. But nevertheless, to speak in terms of images rather than just giving lessons or lectures, certainly from my point of view, has a great value. So here is the story. It takes place more than 1,000 years ago. It begins in Japan, where a young couple married and had a son. And the son they called Kakau. I've actually tried to research this name to see what it can mean, but I've had no success, except the closest I can get is that it means certainty or to be sure, which of course is a good Dharma name, to be sure of our path, to be certain about our direction in life. And so Kakau was born, and he grew like all the other children in his village. He played the games that children played, and he went through his childhood into his adolescence. It was here that he began to meet some difficulties that will be familiar to so many of us, where you begin to doubt what has been presented to you as the version of the rest of your life. The idea that you would get married and then have children and buy a house and work a lot to pay for all the things that you still owe money to see your children married, to see them have grandchildren, for you to retire, and then finally to die. And that's presented as normal life, I think, for most of us in the West at least. But once you begin to doubt that, once you have that moment, which is called the opening of the wisdom eye, once you have that moment, then those images that are presented no longer seem to be valuable. And so we begin to look for a different way, something that, at least to our own heart, has more value. It's as though we wake up on a cold, wet, dark January morning when the alarm clock is ringing so early and we have to go to a job that we don't like. And there's a voice in our head which says, well, there must be a better way to live than this. And there is. There really is. The next part is finding it. And finding it without compromise. Very often we just turn from one set of ideas to another without really investigating the movement behind our life, the karmic forces and the habits that we have cultivated. And so Kakau, like the Buddha, in fact, like all of us who are on a sincere Dharma path, the Buddha was the same. I think this part of our life where we begin to question what's been presented to us as normal is something that we have all experienced. And the Buddha, according to the legend of his life, was born a prince, and he was tall, slim, handsome, intelligent, athletic, surrounded by people who loved him. He could wear the finest silks from Varanasi, bathe in beautiful, deep, hot baths of perfumed water. He had women musicians surrounding him all day, serenading him, playing his favourite Beatles songs. He had his parents, his father and stepmother who loved him. He had his wife who loved him. And then he began to reflect, well, I have all this. He had the life that we have now, more or less. But there would be that doubt. I have all this, and yet I still get bored. I still meet frustration and disappointment, even anger. I still meet anxiety and stress. But I have all this. So obviously this isn't enough. And that's the desire mind that keeps us reaching for the next thing to bring happiness to us. It's like we have this huge hole inside us, and we just keep accumulating all these things, relationships and material objects, putting them in this hole, and they just fall through. So we need the next thing. It's an endless, endless battle. And the Buddha, or Gautama, or Prince Siddhartha, as he was in those days, recognized this. I have all this, and yet I'm still not happy all the time. And that was the question he asked himself. When the only thing I want in life is to be happy all the time, why can't I be? What is the cause of my unhappiness? And then he began this quest, this 6-year quest. This beautiful quest that at the end he awakened, a fully self-enlightened being. And then through his graciousness and his kindness, he shared it with the rest of us. If you want to be happy in your life, here is the path you need to take. And don't compromise. Don't give up something that means something to you from this erroneous idea that it will make somebody else happy. Their happiness is their concern as your happiness is your concern. Find the things that bring happiness to you in your life, and then you will share that happiness with all beings. So Kakau had the same feeling. What's the point of any of this? I need to find a life that has greater value for me. And so he began this quest, beginning as a teenager. He began to travel around this part of Japan, seeking out teachers, seeking out people who could tell him the purpose of life is this, and this is what you have to do. And of course, although many people would speak in that way, nothing resonated in his heart. Sometimes they would get close and they would offer practices for him to try, and he would try them. But all of them fell short of what he wanted. He wanted to understand the cause of his unhappiness, the cause of his discomfort, the cause of his uneasiness in life. I already have everything, so why do I still feel like this? Eventually he heard that there were living masters, men and women, who had found something that had real value. And they lived in China. Now, to go to China in those days was not as easy as it would be, perhaps not right now in this moment. But in our usual life, to take an aeroplane from one country to another is usually fairly simple. But in those days, more than 1,000 years ago, of course, this just wasn't possible. So first of all, he had to work. He had to find the money to buy his boat passage. But then, if you reflect, he had to find a way to stay in China, and he had to learn another language. And so he did all these things. He made that effort. And of course, this is always what the master wants to see. The master always wants to see your effort. We never heard of anyone who became enlightened or awakened sitting on the sofa watching soap operas and movies. You have to make your effort. And so this is what he did. He made his effort. He took this boat from Japan to China. And when he arrived in China, now remember, he's in a strange new country. He has to begin to inquire, where do the masters live? Where can I find them? Now perhaps in those days, they lived in the Wutai Mountains in the north of China, which has since become a sort of an enclave for Zen monasteries. And so he decided, okay, well, that's where I have to go. I have to go from here, where I've landed, to the north of China. China's a huge country. And so he would have to take care of himself in all that journey. And he did that because what he wanted what we would now call Dharma. He wanted to understand, what is the cause of my unhappiness? What is the cause of my difficulties? No one can tell me. They just say, well, buy this new smartphone, then you'll be happy. Get this new relationship, then you'll be happy. Buy a bigger car, then you'll be happy. I mean, variations of that, of course. And so he made this long journey by foot until he found in the Wutai Mountains, he found these masters living simple, quiet lives in harmony with nature. And he began to speak to all of them. Many of them didn't want to know him. Just because you are looking for a master doesn't mean to say that the master is looking or waiting for you. But eventually he found one, and he knelt in front of him. Now he spent a long time on this quest, from his teenage years to his mid to late 20s. Now he kneels in front of this master. He puts his hands in Anjali. The master says, he asked this question. What is it that you want? That's such a big question. When we come to our Dharma life, when we come to our practice, what is it that you want? What are you looking for? If you say, well, I want to be peaceful in my life, that's okay. If you say, I want to be enlightened, then you need to change something. We do the practice not to get something, but to see something, to see the architect of our life, to see the forces that continually project us in the same direction. He knelt in front of the master. The master said, what do you want? He said, I want to be free. I want to be free from this mind that keeps me spinning round and round and round. I'm asking you humbly, please show me the way. And this master said, okay, yes, I will. I will help you. I will serve you, because this is the role of the master, to serve the disciple. It's not to be honored, to become famous, and now to become internet stars and celebrities on television and radio. It is to share Dhamma so other beings can benefit as we have benefited. And so the master said, yes, okay, I'll teach you. And Kakau said, thank you. What do I need to do? And the master spoke. He said, the first thing you need to do is to stop. Stop running in your life. Our lives are propelled. We're always running away from something in the past or towards something in the future. The first part of our meditation is to stop. Stop chasing things. Stop grasping at things. Stop looking for things. Just stop. There's one small story where a monk is meditating and meditating and meditating. And the master observes him and finally comes and says, what are you doing? The monk says, I'm chasing happiness. The master says, but how do you know that happiness is not behind you, trying to catch you? And that's much more our Dharma way, that we take our posture, our sitting posture, as beautifully as we can, as elegantly as we can. And we take our attention then to a mundane object, the breath. The breath comes in, the breath goes out. The breath comes in, the breath goes out. Whether we are sitting, standing, walking or lying down, this breathing process continues. And you don't have to think about it. You don't have to remind yourself of it. It just happens. Whether you are awake or asleep, conscious or unconscious, the body breathes. So we turn our attention to that simple practice. And we allow everything else ultimately, I'm not going to explain the whole practice of Vipassana, but we ultimately allow everything else to fall away. Our awareness becomes sharper, it becomes acute. We begin to notice trends in ourselves. I think one of the qualities you can meet in these, when we do longer retreats, but of course, when you just sit every day, you can have a similar experience. You can recognize. There's almost this voice in the head which says, oh, I always do that. In this kind of situation, I always do that. And that's the beginning of your liberation. You begin to see the road that your habits are taking you along. At that point, you can change it. Until then, you're just blind. You're just following the mind. There's a huge difference between being with the mind and following the mind. So following the mind is just an unconscious action, and we find ourselves in our same kind of life story, doing the same kinds of things over and over and over, meeting the same kinds of fears over and over and over, finding ourselves in the same kind of relationships over and over and over. So the first part of our practice is to stop, just be still. Take your attention to this mundane object, the breath. Sit as beautifully as you can, and don't look for something. Don't try to make something happen. Don't wait for something, but just sit. The breath comes in, the breath goes out. The mind arises, the mind passes away. The mind arises, the mind passes away. Sensations arise in the body, sensations fade away. This is our practice. Its power lies in its ultimate simplicity, where we're not trying to get something. We're simply being with things as they are, and more seeing things as they really are. And that's what the modern word vipassana means, to see things as they really are. And then we begin to understand, well, you're not this body. The body arises and passes away. It passes through its life's journey, old age, sickness, death. It's not what you are. It's just something you're in relationship with. And the mind itself, these thoughts, moods, feelings, emotions arising, passing away in an endless stream. None of them are you, none of them are yours, and none of them are what you are. So relax a little bit. We can just be with the mind. And every time we don't interact with the mind, every time we don't indulge or repress something, we take one more step on this path of purification, this in Buddhist teaching called the Visuddhimagga, the path of purification, to let go and let go and let go. It's so beautiful. It is so beautiful, but it demands from you your effort to be still, your effort not to look for something, your effort to go past your boredom, your effort to go past any desire to be someone, but just to sit and be still and allow the truth to come to you. Beautiful. So Kakau trained like this. And it's not a weekend course. It's years of dedicated practice, and this is what he did. Of course, his life was extremely simple. So there's an advantage to that in the 21st century we don't have. We are bombarded by images, by internet, by television, by radio, by our smartphones and all these things that we have with us all the time. In those days, it was much simpler. And often when I'm speaking in the Dharma hall, I speak about my own training, about how it was much simpler in those days, because we just didn't have those things. We went to the monastery to train. There were no distractions. You sat and sat and sat. And then the blessing was when the master arrived and would speak. And then you would reflect on these beautiful words of Dharma, because that's the quality of Dharma, to be beautiful. Now we have so many distractions. It's not always so easy. You really have to have a strong determination. I want to be free. That's what I want. That's why I'm doing this. From my own life, when I was a teenager, I was really terrified of the idea that there would be a nuclear war between Russia and America. And so the fear that came out of that affected every part of my personality. I became literally the angry young man, really awful to be around. And then I recognized something. This is a burden for me to carry. I don't want to be like this anymore. What can I do? And happily for me, when I was 18 years old, I literally bumped into transcendental meditation, which was the door opening to my Dharma life. And I've been on this Dharma train ever since. So Kakau trained in this way. He sat with awareness. He walked with awareness. He stood still with awareness. He lay down with awareness. He cultivated this habit of awareness, but more. Because awareness is only one part of our practice. With awareness, we see the nature of the mind. With love, with this loving open heart, we accept. It doesn't mean we have to like anything, but we can accept everything. And then with wisdom, we respond. We are never to be victims in any aspect of our life. So with awareness, we see. With love, we accept. And with wisdom, we respond. And this ultimately is the whole of Dharma. With love, with wisdom, with awareness we see, with love we accept, and with wisdom we respond. So Kakau trained in this way. The years passed and he lived his simple life. And it was pleasant for him. As our stresses and our fears and our desires fall away, life becomes very simple and very open. And we're in that position of simply responding to whatever life presents to us. We're not selecting, not picking or choosing, as one Chinese Zen master said at one time. This Dharma path is very easy. It simply means giving up picking and choosing. Now, it's not easy, but it is simple. Stop creating these variants in your life. I want this, but I don't want that. We see what's in front of us and then we respond. This is where we become powerful beings in our own life, where we can't be manipulated through fear. We can't be attracted through desire to things that have no value for us. And so Kakau trained in this way and met those results. Dharma is actually very simple, and the equations in Dharma are also very simple. If you make the effort for practice, you receive the results of making the effort for practice. But if you don't make the effort for practice, you receive the results of not making the effort for practice. It's so beautiful. And so he made the effort for practice. As the years passed, he began to feel it was time to go home, to go back to Japan. And so this took some preparation. It was much easier to arrive in China than it was to leave China and go back to Japan. But nevertheless, he was able to do these things and finally was able to book passage on a boat. However, during his time living alone in the Wute Mountains, he became known as a great master. And so people from different villages would come and they would arrive in front of him and they'd put their hands together and say, "Master, please give us a Dharma teaching." And he would say, "Live with love and be aware." This is the whole of Dharma. Live with love and be aware. And they would say, "Oh, wonderful, wonderful, such a great teaching." And then they would go. The moment they left, he would find a new place to live. He liked his solitude. So he would move from place to place. Every time people would find him, he of course would give a Dharma talk. He would give some instruction if necessary. But then he would move. And so he had this reputation for being this great master who loved his solitude, but nevertheless a great master. And so he decided it was time to go home, and so he booked his passage on a boat. But it became known that this great master was returning to Japan. And it became known in Japan as traders would move backwards and forwards between these two countries. It would be known that Kakau, this fully awakened master, this Japanese fully awakened master, would be returning to Japan. The emperor of Japan heard of this. He thought, "This is wonderful. We have our own fully awakened master, the first Japanese master to be awakened. Well, this is just wonderful." And he sent his armed guards and ministers to the boat to meet Kakau when he arrived. And when he did arrive, this humble, because Dharma is about humility. The whole of our Dharma path is about letting go of this self-identity. And of course, there are many famous stories around masters who not only achieve this, but then have to demonstrate it. Bodhidharma being probably the most famous. So Kakau left the boat, and the emperor's men said, "Oh, Master Kakau, we have heard about you. We've heard about your illumination. The Emperor of Japan, our emperor, wants to meet you. Please come." Well, awakened or not, you pretty much have to do what the emperor commands, and so he went with them. And he arrived at the palace after many days. He arrived at the palace. And there was the emperor sitting in this great peacock throne. And Kakau, this simple, humble man, was brought before him. Now the emperor was very excited. The word enlightenment, although that's a Western term, but the word awakening was known. But they didn't know anyone who had actually done it. And so the emperor was very excited. He said, "So, Kakau, we are so pleased to see you here. We have understood that you're an awakened being." Well, Kakau, you can't really answer that question. So he just stood there in silence. But the emperor then said, "So, please, show us your enlightenment." When we don't know, we speak in this kind of way. Show us your enlightenment, as though it's a magic trick, an illusion. Show us your enlightenment. So Kakau had in the folds of his sleeve a flute, a wooden flute. And he took out this flute and put it to his lips and blew one pure, clear note. He then put the flute back in his sleeve and bowed and left the palace and was never seen or heard of again. This is the story of Kakau. The emperor says, "Show us your enlightenment." It would not have mattered at all what Kakau did. He could have blown his nose. He could have sung a song. He could have sat down and given a Dharma talk. Because whatever he did was infused with awakening. Everything was about his awakening. The way he walked, the way he sat, the way he spoke, the way he carried himself in life was all about his awakening. The awakening that we often chase when we're perhaps younger is not about getting something. It's about letting go of all these burdens of who am I? What am I? All these conditioned ideas that are given to us about what a man is, what a woman is, what a German, French, Swiss, British, Japanese, Chinese person is. All these ideas that were given to us by other people, of course, all begin to fall away, and all that's left is the purity of the heart. When the Buddha became enlightened, when he awakened under the Bodhi tree, which is now in the town of Buddha Gaya in northern India, he smiled. The response to that awakening was not some kind of excitement, like a footballer scoring a goal. When his eyes opened as the sun was rising and the moon was setting on his 35th birthday, he awakened as he opened his eyes as a fully awakened being. The response to that was a smile. Now, whatever the Buddha and Kakau and all the great masters have achieved, it's there for you if you want it. You just have to be determined enough. But that determination is so subtle. On the one hand, you have to make the practice, but you have to make the practice without intention. You have to sit simply to sit. You have to walk just to walk. When you come and do retreats, these are the instructions. Let go of any idea of gaining something, of becoming something that you're not. You're fine. You're all fine. But the conditions for your unhappiness are not outside. They're not from other people. They live inside you. So that's what we do when we sit. We allow these old influences to arise, to see them, to know them, and ultimately to let them go. And if we let go a little, there's a little peace. And if we let go a lot, there's a lot of peace. And if we let go completely, complete peace. So this is our practice. This is our beautiful Dharma way, to open the heart so that the whole of our life becomes the expression of our own awakening. And so I offer these few words to you this morning for your consideration and your reflection. And may you all be well and happy. Thank you.